Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. Fun one for us because it's been a couple of weeks since we've been able to speak to our guy, Terrence Edwards. We'll do that today. Great day to have Terrence on the show, by the way, with another very impressive wide receiver, Craig Dandridge, getting set to make his commitment announcement later on this afternoon. Live DawgNation coverage of that. By the way, Terrence will help us preview that. We'll find out if Georgia can get, what would this be, 5 straight days of getting a commitment? We will see if it goes down that way. We'll talk about that. There's also some other fun recruiting stuff that's out there. We'll look back on the Jae Lamar story from yesterday. What a remarkable one that was. Georgia got itself a good running back prospect. The moment was clearly meaningful for Lamar, and I certainly appreciate that. Oh, yeah, by the way, we did a big thing the other day about a 5-star projection for Georgia. There is another one of them today. So we'll find out what that's all about. But let me begin with a guy that we've sort of kind of, punched on a little bit here this offseason, the very outspoken Bret Bielema. All of a sudden now he's calling out Kirby Smart, pointing the finger at Georgia about something. What is that all about? Let's try to find out together. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at georgiadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Let me make a small point that kind of builds to a bigger point here today, and then after that, we got a lot of recruiting stuff to take care of in today's show, all of it really fun. This, perhaps, though, something we need to do prior to all of that. I think that there is a thing that sometimes fans sort of gravitate to on sort of one side or the other when it comes to the extremes of opinions, especially when I'm talking about opinions about various players. I think the two sort of twin poles of opinion from fans is, on the one side, you've got, oh, this guy's the greatest thing ever. He should be a first-round pick. And unfortunately, sometimes in fan conversation online, it also gravitates towards, oh, this guy is terrible. He should be replaced. You see what I'm talking about? Sometimes in fan conversation, there's two wild extremes of, hey, great player, future first-round pick, best in the country, praise and all kinds of accolades. The flip side of that is, this guy is terrible and you got to get him out of the game or whatever else. Sometimes there's some of that, whether we want that to be true or not. Sometimes that fan conversation exists. However, for those of you, and you're obviously an above-average audience, for those of you that kind of know football a little bit better, here's what I think you know and understand. That most football players don't kind of fit in those two extremes, especially for the really good teams. Not everyone's going to be future first-round pick, all-SEC, all-American. And very few players are actually going to be so deficient they need to be replaced. And oftentimes, whatever player kind of is most in the crosshairs for whatever fan base we happen to be talking about, oftentimes that's probably a little unfair. It's probably overstated. But most players don't kind of gravitate to that sort of bottom end of the extreme either. Most players are sort of right in the middle. In other words, most really good football teams have a lot of players who just sort of do a job. And they do it with a little fanfare, and they're perhaps not going to be a future first-round pick, and it's not the kind of player that ends up as a poster on some kid's wall, or they don't have a million Instagram followers, or however you judge this in this world in which we live in today. They're not superstar players, but they are very effective at doing a job. And if you want to be a great football team, you better have a bunch of guys that sort of contribute to your culture and just sort of do a job. My reason for saying all that is I think Georgia brings in a guy like, say, Josh McCray, former running back at Illinois, to be one of those guys that just sort of does a job around here and does an important job, a job that a year ago, because of injury or whatever else, Georgia probably just didn't have enough of. McCray is here to do it. In fact, many of you know this. I'm getting ready next week to kind of have some vacation time. It'll be my final days off before we really get serious with the 2025 season. SEC Media Days, high school football will be starting up. college football, fall camp, obviously by the time we get to August, and then the season will be here before you know it. We really get ramped up for this and start taking it kind of serious. Not that we're not taking it seriously already, but we take it especially serious. You've heard me say we're kind of a summer cadence. Summer cadence is over on the other side of the 4th of July. That's kind of always been our tradition around here, and we are looking forward to that. But the point is, for some of the shows we're getting ready for next week, one of the things that we're going to talk about is Josh McCray coming here to do a job for Georgia, to be that guy that gets hard yards in the middle. As Kirby Smart said at SEC spring meetings, the guy that gets 3rd and 1, 4th and 1. That these things are important. You want to keep drives alive. You want to give yourself a chance to score more points. You got to sustain drives to do that. Tough yardage in the middle against the opposing defense, kind of how you get that done. We think Josh McCray might be able to be one of those guys that makes that happen. So you probably agree with that. I think you understand where I'm coming from. And you may also be wondering, okay, BA, but what's this all about? Where is this going? Well, guess what? The acquisition of Josh McCray by Georgia and whatever Kirby Smart, as the architect of the program, might have done to make this happen, this is all of a sudden in the news today, because about the most outspoken coach we've kind of seen in college football this offseason, certainly one of them, Illinois coach Bret Bielema, is now outspoken again. But this time, he's not talking about, Shane Beamer and this bowl game. And by the way, I don't think any coach is trying to get more mileage out of one bowl win than Bret Bielema is for Illinois. And he's not, complaining about the college football playoff format or whatever it is we've heard Bielema talking about. All of a sudden now, to my ears, to my eyes, this feels like kind of a direct accusation against Georgia for tampering with one of his players. And this is serious because obviously we've got a situation where Wisconsin's basically suing Miami for this, the whiniest bunch of you-know-whats in the world, apparently in the Big Ten. But nonetheless here, Bret Bielema judge for yourself here. Is this an example of him sort of calling out Kirby, sort of calling out the Georgia program because Josh McCray, who was at Illinois, is now at Georgia? Let me show you this quote from the story we wrote at DawgNation.com. Our guy Connor Riley writing it. Bielema making an appearance on the Triple Option podcast. Now, here's what Bielema says on this podcast. He says, "We did lose a guy to Georgia. Somehow," and this is where I think the sarcasm kind of comes in here, somehow he found his way into the portal, and then 12 hours after being in the portal, he was on a flight to Georgia. I don't know how that happened, but it's crazy. So that sort of feels like sort of a passive-aggressive, and I've told you before how much I hate passive-aggressive stuff, but that feels like a passive-aggressive way of saying that Georgia somehow tampered to get Josh McCray, convinced him to leave the Illinois roster and come down to Georgia. I think it's fair to ask, what's going on here? Why all of a sudden is Bielema saying that kind of thing, especially when it sort of feels like a little bit of a tune changed for Bielema as it relates to McCray? There was a story back in April, headline from 24/7 Sports. Bret Bielema, quote, wasn't shocked by Josh McCray's decision to enter the transfer portal. He says, "We've prepared for that moment." He says, "Josh is a kid," this is from the story, "Josh is a kid we're incredibly proud of. He should finish up this spring with a degree. He's going to walk out of here as a 4-year player who's done a lot of really good things. Bowl game MVP." He says he came in and expressed his interest in getting in the portal. "Obviously, I talked to him about what I thought we could do and where we're at, but his intentions are to go to the portal." Then he says, "I totally understand that." He says, "Josh is a very accomplished player. I don't know if we'll do much in the running back room to replace him." So basically says, yeah, we expected this to happen. We understand that. Essentially wishes him well. But all of a sudden now there's this like about face, and now he's making these sort of veiled passive-aggressive, which is not very, I would say masculine, but nonetheless sort of passive-aggressive, accusations at Georgia about, somehow Georgia did something nefarious to get McCray off the Illinois roster and onto the Georgia roster. So once again, what is this about and what's going on here? Well, I think we have a little bit of insight. First of all, we know this. It has been reported that McCray was actually essentially among the very first high school recruits Bielema brought in as Illinois coach. So there is a long-standing relationship here between the two. And apparently Illinois is not spending a lot on NIL. Bret Bielema made an appearance. David Pollack's got a podcast now. You can see it on YouTube. Bielema made an appearance on David Pollack's podcast, and I listened to it because I wanted to hear if he said anything about McCray. He did not. But he did reveal this. They're only spending, according to Bielema, and I don't believe any NIL claim, no matter if it's outlandish because it's really, really high or outlandish because it's really, really low. I essentially believe nothing. My advice to you would be to believe nothing as well. But Bielema told Pollack they only spent $5 million on NIL a year ago. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what he told Pollack in his podcast. Their NIL budget was $5 million. So what you perhaps have here is a guy that realizes, we don't have very much money to spend. If these programs want our players, maybe we're going to have a hard time holding on to them. In fact, to speak about that interview with Pollack, Bielema told David that trying to hold on to guys, not mentioning Josh McCray, but trying to hold on to guys who kind of count as some of their sort of more established playmakers, their nucleus, he says they kind of view that as the most important job that he and his assistant coaches have, apparently not doing that job very well when it comes to Josh McCray. But nonetheless, this is what David Pollack recently told Bret Bielema about this subject now that it's in the news with Bielema sort of calling out Georgia. Here is Bielema from the David Pollack podcast.
The true recruitment and retainment of our players is what we do every day in this building. I always tell our coaches, as an employee in this building, right, the one thing you can do every day that really helps all of us is be consistent and be great in communication, both giving and hearing, right? And our kids live that every day. I think I'm not oblivious to the fact that probably our 10 to 15 top players could have went other places for probably, not just a little bit of money, a lot more money, but they know what we've built. They know the true reward. NIL is kind of going away, so now we're going to go with this revenue share. But I always say NIL, the I always stands for name, image, and likeness. But I always said NIL was instant money. That's what that I stands for. The NFL, that F stands for forever. If you get a chance to put yourself in a position, so when that NFL gives you an opportunity, you're in a position to make more money than you can make in a lifetime. That's when the true moment comes, and that's what a lot of our guys play for.
I think it's interesting in that clip, and by the way, it's See Ball, Get Ball. That's the name of the podcast from David Pollack. You can find it on YouTube. That's where I found it. And really interesting interview with Bret Bielema. It's worth your time to see the whole thing. They talk a lot of football and things like that. Very little of it is about this sort of NIL part of this, but that's the part that's relevant here today, just simply because of I would call it an accusation that Bielema is making about Georgia. Now, listen, I am somewhat sympathetic to the, fact that college ball needs rules and things like that. I totally get that. But in this particular issue, to be completely honest, I don't want to hear a word about this. I really don't. I mean, there was a show we did a few years ago when this sort of transfer portal stuff, the way that it is now, is first starting, where this is back when Tyreek Stevenson still played for Georgia. And like the Miami Herald wrote a story about him transferring to Miami when he wasn't in the portal. They were talking about how Stevenson would be a good fit for Miami in the future. This is what Georgia's been dealing with the entire time here. When you have the deepest roster, obviously you're going to have programs sort of coming after your players, and Georgia's been dealing with that quite some time. Bear Alexander on G-Day a couple of years ago. Trust me when I tell you that Georgia's dealt with more than its fair share of this. But to Kirby Smart's credit, unlike a lot of these Big Ten coaches, Kirby Smart has never whined about the system being unfair, about the rules being unfair. He's never done that. The only thing that Kirby Smart has ever complained about is the rules being unclear. Not unfair, unclear. And I think the overall position from Georgia is, just tell us what the rules are. Whether it's the written rules enforced as they're written or sort of the unwritten rules that kind of get, enforced on sort of a wink, wink, nod, nod, whatever else. What are the rules? Tell us what the rules are. There's no such thing as unfair. We'll simply find a way to succeed whatever the rules are. The only thing that holds Georgia back is when the rules are unclear. You've got this ponderous rule book that is sort of, arbitrarily enforced. That's unclear, and that's going to make things hard on Georgia. But there is no such thing when you're Georgia as unfair. whatever the rules are, Georgia will find a way to succeed. That's not the prevailing wisdom that seems to exist in the Big Ten, because you've got coaches like Bret Bielema, or, what's his face from Nebraska, or, the situation in Wisconsin, where they seem to find something new to whine about almost every day. They have sort of a misguided view of what should be fair. Down here in the SEC, it's not about what's fair, it's about what's real. And what do we need to do to succeed? And that's the thing. We have had an off season's worth of Big Ten teams strutting around and feeling like they're big and bad because they've had a couple of national champions, and Bret Bielema won a bowl game that they don't stop talking about. They don't stop talking about it. And a lot of people have been in the media and sort of the willing accomplices of the sort of, the Midwestern folks in the Big Ten are kind of wondering, what's the SEC going to do about this? The SEC is going to get right back to work, populating rosters, getting ready to compete, getting ready to win championships, getting ready to get the very best players it possibly can. The SEC plays rough. That's just the way that it goes. I have no reason to believe that Georgia tampered with Josh McCray. As far as I can tell, McCray went to the transfer portal, saw a great option in Georgia, and took it, and perhaps is getting better, compensation, better NIL down here than he would up there, Illinois, because Georgia probably takes better care of its players than Illinois perhaps does. All of this, in other words, sort of falls flat for me. This kind of passive-aggressive allegation, this sort of complaint about how unfair it is that his guys now at Georgia, after originally sort of shrugging it all off and maybe now kind of feeling a little bit embarrassed, they lost a player that Georgia wants. Maybe this player's a lot better than we realized if Georgia wants him enough to scoop him up as quickly as it did. I think all of this is sort of conduct unbecoming for Bret Bielema. He has been a very big talker so far this offseason, which is fine as far as we're concerned. Just make sure you keep Georgia's name out of your mouth. All right, let me sort of shift to something else here for a moment. Speaking of running backs, what a moment it was yesterday with the four-star running back Jae Lamar. And I'll tell you, man, I was really proud of our chance to be a part of this. I'm a Georgia fan, of course, and I like it when Georgia gets good running back commits. That's always a really good thing. But I think that yesterday, in many ways, also sort of felt like a celebration of the college football system and the fact that even as things kind of change, and some of these changes, we'll admit, we don't think are changes for the better, there are still these moments when a young man sees the path to college football as an incredible opportunity for his life to sort of write his own story, or perhaps change aspects of his story, or whatever that is for the player in question. It just sort of feels like the culmination of a lifelong dream, and obviously the start of a new journey eventually as a college athlete. And I can only imagine, obviously I wasn't this level of athlete, so anything I would say about this is just a guess, but I can only imagine that it must be an incredibly heavy thought to think, after all the hard work, after all the tough practices, you know how hot it is when you're in that acclimation period in the early summer down there in Moultrie, Georgia, for these outdoor practices. And, they got a nice indoor facility too, but they're going to be practicing plenty outside because you play games hot on Friday night. They're doing a bunch of hot weather practice in the summer, all kinds of weight room stuff. And after all of that work, you get a chance to go play at the University of Georgia. And Jae Lamar and his family kind enough to bring us in with him on that moment yesterday. It was incredibly emotional. It's worth going to the DawgNation YouTube page and kind of reliving the entire thing. I hope you will. But in celebration of the fact that Georgia added itself a good player and the moment was apparently incredibly meaningful for Lamar himself, let's relive a portion of that here right now.
For the next 3 to 4 years, I've decided to take my talent and pursue my academics at the University of Georgia. I feel like an absolute priority at the University of Georgia. And when I get there, man, I just want to make it the best that I can make it. I just want to go and I want to go compete at a high level.
What does this feel like to be here now? I see the emotions are just running through you. Like, what's going through your heart right now?
I just thank God. I just thank God for backing me away from all the situations that I was in. And man, I just thank God, man. I'm honestly speechless about this day.
Pure, genuine tears. Tears of, at one point, a day like today seemed like a fairy tale. Him hugging mom and his brother I think 2 of his brothers are here, and it's just reality kind of hits you kind of what he just did. And when I see people get emotional and stuff, to me it's not weak. It's love. It's love, and it's genuine, and that made me tear up. So it was awesome to see.
The voice you hear there at the end is Sean Calhoun. That's the Colquitt County coach, very successful coach, kind of a flagship program down in the southwest corner of the state. Lamar, as he tells his own story, was away from football for a while, kind of working as a lot of young men do, trying to find that maturity, trying to find that just kind of sense of himself so that he could be the football player that his athleticism gave him a chance to be. And last year, if you saw him on the field for the Packers, you kind of saw that coming together, and it's only, I think, been an arrow up since then. I mean, I think you're just really moved by the emotion of that moment. So proud for him. Really grateful that he gave us a chance to share that with him. I think that Georgia's getting itself, by the appearances of the film and everything else, a really good football player. But yesterday was also the continuation of a really good story, and perhaps that's the more important than anything else. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. We're glad you're with us, whether it's video, 10 a.m., live this week. Next week, kind of a portion of pre-recorded, some live stuff coming for you too. We'll tell you more about that. Really excited about it. But for today, just so thankful to have our friends at Merriweather and Tharp as a part of the show. And I do think of them as friends, and I am thankful for them, even though what they do, the service they provide, is one of those things that when you speak about it, sometimes you almost feel like you need to speak in hushed tones. Divorce. Scary, confusing word. It's a weighty word. It is not an emotionally neutral thing for people. You have a story about this, whether it's your personal story or something from your family or a friend that's been impacted by it. The statistics are what they are. In an audience the size of ours, of course, many of you have dealt with it, or many of you might see it as something you will be forced to deal with in the future. And in some cases, many cases, it wasn't chosen by you. It was sort of chosen for you. You have no say in the matter. It's just going to happen. Perhaps you've tried to fight to prevent it, but it's just not going to happen. Well, if that's you, then what's the next step? Well, that's where our friends at Merriweather and Tharp can kind of step in and talk to you about this. Can alleviate some of the confusion you perhaps have. If you've got questions, in other words, about the divorce process, Merriweather and Tharp can provide those answers for you. In fact, they do that now statewide. You've heard us talk about the other offices they have in Athens and Carrollton and Peachtree City and places like that. They're also introducing a brand new office in Columbus here too. When I say that, I'm talking about attorneys embedded in these communities. They know the local lay of the land. They know the courts. They know the judges. There's an institutional knowledge here that makes your process even more beneficial for you, because honestly, you deserve someone who can explain everything to you and, when needed, fight for your rights in this aspect, for your relationship with your children, your finances, all of the things that are kind of sort of downstream from this discussion. You deserve a strong advocate on your side. That's what Merriweather and Tharp wants to provide. So you can find them online, GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com, GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. And when you speak to them, if you need to, do me a favor, ask them about that model M&T level of service, because what I'm hearing from our people is this is right now one of the more popular offerings from them for those who seek cost certainty about this divorce process, kind of alleviating that concern. Merriweather and Tharp getting really creative to help you with that too. So find them online. It's GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com, GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. Merriweather and Tharp is your source for Georgia divorce. All right, we got Terrence Edwards here coming up in a little bit. Fun to have him back on the program. Prior to that, though, let's do a couple of more recruiting notes here as we go around the doghouse, presented today by our friends at Daytona Beach. And, earlier this week, we talked a lot about Georgia, perhaps, as online reports are suggesting, trending with a 5-star elite prospect, Caden Prothro, the tight end. Made a big deal about that. Well, guess what? a couple of days later, as Georgia's in the midst of a recruiting hot streak that's seen commitments to the program now 4 days in a row, with perhaps another one coming today. There are also discussions ongoing about how that streak for the Dogs could be continued a little longer here, too. Let me show you this on the screen here. Coming from our friends at On3, some of their respected analysts, Chad Simmons, Steve Wiltfong, now putting in big prediction for one of the top defensive linemen in the entire country, James Johnson, to land at Georgia. Johnson will make his pledge on Saturday. This is obviously a very contested recruitment. Georgia, I think, had a successful visit with Johnson to give itself a real chance here. But it's still one of those things. You got to go down to South Georgia, goes to Northwestern High School. You got to go down to South Florida, I should say. Let me say that correctly. South Florida, try to pull this guy out with a program like Miami trying to hold on to him, or other programs trying to get involved here. Obviously, dollars are being thrown around. You got to imagine that. But according to respected experts from On3, Georgia right now is very much in this. In fact, they may be slightly favored to win this recruiting battle here right now. We'll talk to Jeff Sintel more about this tomorrow. But this is obviously a huge development for the class of 2026. Now, it is also fair to point out, and we'll be honest about this, we have seen this flurry of news before where it's the announcement of a commitment date, the prediction of Georgia, and then right before the announcement, the prediction changes. We have seen that, of course. And in this age, you've got to be on guard for anything. So I'm certainly not telling you to bake the cake and get the T-shirts printed and the celebration, paraphernalia ready to go for James Johnson just yet. That's not what we're saying. But it is worth noting that Georgia is a major factor in this decision as it gets ready to take place there on Saturday. And, of course, one more note to note, if you want to say it that way. It is Craig Dandridge this afternoon, DawgNation live coverage of this. Dandridge gets ready to go around 4 p.m. We'll go on air from Cambridge High School just slightly before that. Looking forward to providing you coverage of this. We've shown you highlights recently. Dandridge is really making a name for himself right now, becoming one of the best players in the state of Georgia regardless of position. And this would be a big-time wide receiver add if Georgia is indeed to pull this off and get it now a fifth straight day of having a commitment. What a story that would be. We'll be watching it closely. And we'll talk to Terrence Edwards about this in just a moment. But prior to that, let me remind you, this is Around the Doghouse, presented today by our friends at Daytona Beach. And it is a great time for you to take a beach vacation. I know how it goes. You get busy. I know a lot of folks like this. You got kids playing sports, or you're just busy at work. And you're into summer now and you realize we haven't really planned our summer vacation yet. Well, a place like Daytona Beach is going to be a great resource for you because there are a lot of really great resorts and really great hotels in Daytona Beach. So you've got options to choose from. If, other things are booked up, other places, things like that. I want you to think about Daytona Beach as a place that you can get a great hotel stay right now at perhaps an even better deal than you realize. In fact, it's worth checking out the website, DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals, to find out more about this and look at all the great things you can do while at Daytona Beach. Golf or fishing or enjoying the great restaurant scene. Of course, we know Daytona Beach as the home of the Great American Race and all the really fun stuff as it relates to motorsports. But trust me, there is so much going on all the time at Daytona Beach. You deserve to check it out for yourself. You can fly there, after all. International Airport serves you. They got 23 miles of shoreline. Make sure you check it out. DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals. That is DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals today. All right. It is, of course, great to have Daytona Beach as a part of Around the Doghouse. We will also tell you this. So later on in the show, we're going to tap dance here for just a second. Later on in the show, it's one of those things where, my job is sort of talk about what the main news is. There are occasionally moments in which I am interested in stories that are probably too small to spend too much time on, but they are certainly personally very interesting to me. We perhaps have an example of one of these here today where there is an SEC coach who's kind of in the spotlight a little bit for a pretty strange reason. It has not been going very well for him as of late, and we have been kind of chronicling that here on the show as to exactly what's going on, kind of with that. But now, all of a sudden, his local news organization that covers his program, all of a sudden they're sort of trying to investigate here. And I guess the question that comes up is Hugh Freeze just playing too much golf to have a good football team this fall and to take care of business and recruiting and things like that. This is a really, really, I think, interesting story. We'll get to that. Also, before we're done here today, we celebrated back in April with the Atlanta Falcons kind of finally drafting a former Dawg in the first round of the NFL draft. They had sort of tipped off they might do this. They'd clearly kind of given a lot of voice to this. And then they did select Jalen Walker in the first round of this year's draft, and we think the Falcons have gotten themselves a good one. Falcons need all the good players they can get, especially on defense right now. We think Walker's sort of a plug-and-play type player for them, and Georgia fans are excited about watching him continue his football career, not in his home state. He's from North Carolina, but certainly in the same state where he played in college. Well, guess what? Not to be outdone by them, were the Atlanta Hawks last night in the first round of the NBA draft, taking Asa Newell. So we'll talk about that before we're done here too. But for now, we love our guy Terrence Edwards. So happy to have him here on a Thursday, especially with the possibility that a wide receiver might commit to Georgia today. So let's talk about that right now. Terrence Edwards here today, DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Sounds like Terrence may have had a slight video issue, or maybe we had one on our end. Either way, Terrence kind enough to join us on the phone for a couple of minutes. It's the way we used to do it years ago anyway, so we've done this before. Terrence, I appreciate your time, and I know you've been busy there at Mount Vernon with your summer workouts. I guess if you don't mind, let me just briefly ask you about that. How's that been going? These guys getting ready for the season? And for those who just don't get a chance to see this type of thing, how hard these guys working, and behind the scenes, your coaching staff, these players, what's it like for y'all this time of year?
Hot. It is the hot days of summer right now. A lot of schools will have to adjust their times that they're practicing because Georgia High School Association has a strict guideline on the heat. And yesterday was one of the hotter days, so I had to move my practice up from 8 to 11 to 7 to 10 just to beat the heat wave in the afternoon. So just trying to navigate all that so we could keep everyone safe. It's a big issue, and I think it's an important issue.
It's one of those things where, most of these programs in Georgia now have these really nice field turf fields, and obviously that's great for maintenance. It looks good. They're really nice, nice technology when it comes to that. But, man, they radiate heat, don't they? I mean, if it's 95 in the air, it's probably 120 coming back off that turf probably, right?
Oh, yes, most definitely. That's why every school has what we call the wet bulb, and it kind of indicates of what the weather feels like on that turf. And once they get to a certain degree, there's protocols that we all have to abide by. And yesterday's one of those days where around after 10 o'clock to 12 o'clock, it was really hot and it was in the red. And then it got into the black where you just got to get off the field. And everyone has to abide by that. And I think it's the best thing for these kids because I don't want to have any kind of, heat-related death or illness because we're out here practicing for football.
Yeah, absolutely. We certainly know that. You and these other coaches in Georgia are very serious about doing right by these young men. The acclimation process is a part of football, but at the same time, doing it in a careful way, of course, that's really important. And obviously, Terrence, we always lean on you when it comes to anything related to wide receivers at Georgia. And I tell you, it's been really interesting to watch the way in which Craig Dandridge from Cambridge has really kind of emerged here. I think we've talked about Dandridge before, but for those who perhaps don't remember what you've kind of said about him, or in light of the fact that he may commit to Georgia here today, how much have you seen of Dandridge, and how much do you love it when a guy like this just kind of comes on the scene? Like I saw some of the 7-on-7 stuff from him the other day, and he's making these dazzling catches. He just seems like right now one of the more dynamic athletes in Georgia, sort of regardless of position. Dandridge seems like a pretty exciting athlete right now. What's your overall take on him to the extent that you've seen him?
Yes, I trained one of his teammates. His name is Hudson, and I've been training Hudson for years, and I had no clue Craig Dandridge was his teammate. I didn't know anything about this kid at this point in time last year, and he just blew up and came on the scene very quickly. I went to the spring game to watch him in person. I think he is a really legit prospect. He's long, he's smooth. He's one of those guys that he doesn't look like he's running fast because he's such a smooth runner, and he catches the ball very well. So this is a prospect that really just jumped onto the scene in less than a year, because I don't know if he did play for one of the top 707 programs. I know he didn't play for C1N or Hustle Inc. So he's a prospect that just have leaped onto our radar, and he's a prospect I think whoever gets his services is getting a big-time ball player.
And it's one of the things I really like where, I mean, look, some guys are sort of great right from the – I'm talking about as a prospect right from the start, and it's recognizable, it's easily noticeable, and they're getting these offers from like their 8th grade year, and we certainly talk about plenty of those guys. I also like, especially for a place like Georgia, you know, they're watching players for the full extent of their high school career. And if you really pop, Georgia's going to notice. And we saw Georgia this week, you know, go out and get a Corey Howard from Valdosta, really one of the few major Power 4 programs in on Howard. But that's how wide the net Georgia casts, where they're scouting everybody. You know, very rarely is Georgia going to kind of miss anything in state. So if you're a guy like Dandridge and you kind of come on strong, as you said, over the course of a year, the good news is Georgia's going to notice. And it's really never too late to earn the Georgia offer, whether it be because of what you do during the fall on a Friday night or what you show during a camp. If you're good enough, this is a Georgia program, Terrence, that's kind of shown the ability and certainly the willingness to go out and find you. And I think a lot of Georgia fans should take some comfort in that. Don't you agree?
I think so. And if you just look at the young man from Swainsboro that played 8-man football and just earned the opportunity to be on the Georgia football team. And if you can play and Kirby and company feels that you have the talent to be a Georgia Bulldog, the work ethic, the mindset, they're going to find you. And that young man, I can't remember his name, but he now has an opportunity to play 8-man football, has an opportunity to go compete on that level. And he has the measurables. I mean, he was 6'3", 225. I think ran a 4'5" or 4'6" at Rusty's camp. And if you can play, they're going to find you. And that's one of the things that I keep emphasizing to a lot of parents, that you don't have to be at the big programs to get seen. If you could play, you could play. The program doesn't make you. It's your skill set that gets you the opportunity to play on the next level. So that's just proof in the pudding that if you can play, they're going to find you.
No, I think that's exactly right. I don't know if you had a chance to see this yesterday. I know you're really busy, but we had the commitment ceremony for Jae Lamar, the running back from Colquitt County. And Terrence, I just thought it was so touching, you know, how emotional Lamar was in that moment. It's really funny. So he does the ceremony and he just kind of takes care of business, right? You know, kind of goes through the whole thing, reveals the Georgia baseball jersey, and that was his way of committing to Georgia. It was very much the way in which these always are. And yet, almost immediately after the ceremony is over, I think the weight of it all clearly kind of landed on Lamar's shoulders, and he told the story about, you know, kind of how much it meant to him and how excited he was, and really, frankly, how overwhelmed he was by it. And Terrence, I'm always thankful when these families allow us to be a part of these ceremonies, of course. But I'm glad our audience gets to see that, because you, as a former player, you know, your brother, former player, both of you coaches now, you interact with so many current and future players. This is an emotional moment. And, you know, sometimes we think about these guys as a star rating or a set of stats or just sort of a name on a website, but they are human beings. And I thought Lamar yesterday was really putting his humanity on display. And, you know, he tells his own story very well. It's his story to tell. But, boy, so powerful. And, you know, Terrence, I know you know what it means to the players who get a chance to play college football. And I'm just glad yesterday the rest of the audience got a chance to sort of see that firsthand too.
So one thing that I really try to get across to fans, that these football players are human too. They have human emotions. I know we look up to these Georgia players. I know we go out and watch them every Saturday play and hopefully come out with a victory. And player A doesn't play well, we could get on the internet and bash players, and that just shows you that we are human as well. Like, we do have feelings, and his feelings and his emotions showed yesterday. And I love that that young man wants to be a Georgia Bulldog. If you look at the landscape of this class, there's a lot of Georgia kids in this class. I think I would love for someone to go back and and pull the stats for me, how many Georgia kids, of the most Georgia kids Kirby have signed, maybe outside of the Richard LeCamp class, this may be the most in-state kids in one class from the state of Georgia that they've signed. And I love that Kirby is really what Coach Rick used to do, is put a umbrella around the state and get the best players. And I think these kids grow up, want to be a Georgia Bulldog. Majority of them in-state grows up dreaming of playing between the hedges, and when they really get that opportunity to, you can see the raw emotion comes out like Lamar did yesterday.
No, I think that's really very true. So we were talking a little earlier about, accusation, allegation about how Josh McCray landed on the Georgia roster. This is the running back from Illinois. And, the word that gets thrown around a lot right now is tampering. So-and-so, listen, I've certainly on this show accused other programs of tampering with Georgia's guys. And now people are kind of wondering how, McCray got to Georgia so quickly. As a guy who works a lot of players and kind of knows a little bit of the landscape in a deeper way than perhaps some of us do, how much like tampering really is going on? Kirby Smart said the other day that when it comes to, a lot of these coaches, agents are coming to the coaches now. They bring them a laptop and they sort of show all the guys they are representing that are ready to go in the transfer portal. It seems like a lot of these agents are kind of starting some of these conversations way before the transfer portal even opens. Like, what is reality when it comes to all of this, the best that you're able to tell, Terrence?
That was going to be my answer. From what I'm gathering, what I'm hearing is the representation of these players of putting out a spreadsheet and saying, this is my client, this is what it would take to get him. If you can pay said player this amount, he'll go in the portal. That's kind of what I've got from a lot of coaches, especially at a lot of smaller schools, that's how these players are getting to certain programs. Is the agent is out putting this information out to these schools that their client would be available if you want it. So I don't think it has anything to do with the schools reaching out to these players. I think it's their representation reaching out to the schools.
Yeah, it certainly seems like that could certainly be true. Let me just finish this real quick. So Georgia's now gotten a commitment 4 days in a row. If Dandridge commits today, that'll be 5. They at least have a chance to make it a 6th day in a row on Friday, although there's some, I think, wavering on that. And then there's a possibility they also get at least a commit on Saturday, which could be a 7th day in a row. What do you think about this incredible run that Georgia's been on? Now, some of this is just related to the fact they may sign more players than they've previously signed just because of the new rules. And obviously the calendar's been kind of sort of squeezed into a shorter period now. So some of this is more logistics based, but still to think that you at least have some chance of getting a commitment 7 days in a row in kind of the middle of that right now, it's still amazing. It's still an amazing run for Georgia, is it not?
It is. I think it's, if you just think about, these kids just coming off their official visits, and the time has definitely changed from when I did my commitment after my senior season, because of these kids are enrolling early. They have to go and commit to hold your spots because with the transfer portal. So there's a lot of factors that goes into why these kids are committing in the summer. But I'm a fan of football. I'm a fan of these young men getting an opportunity to live out a dream. I've touched a lot of these kids and know what the work they have put in to get to this spot. So I'm enjoying. I love seeing these kids fulfilling their dream if committed to a university of their choice. So I hope we continue to roll, because we all know I bleed red and black, and I love seeing the best players go to Georgia.
Terrence, great stuff. Thanks for your time. And, of course, you're helping guys also get ready, as you mentioned, on an individual basis for the upcoming season. How can folks get in touch with the Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy?
Yes, that week is coming up for a lot of athletes. So if anyone's looking to continue to keep their momentum from the summer workouts, you can reach me at Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy.
Terrence, awesome stuff. Thanks for your time. Hope you enjoy the remainder of all of this as it goes to the summer. The season will be here before you know it. We appreciate you being here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp.
Thank you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Love that from Terrence Edwards. Great evaluation, by the way, of Craig Dandridge. Don't forget live DawgNation coverage of Dandridge's announcement from Cambridge High School coming up this afternoon. We are looking forward to that. Something else I'm looking forward to is hopefully in the very near future getting a chance to be on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. Obviously, many of you have got your vacations planned here for this summer, and you're kind enough to share that with me. And so many exciting new things happening with Royal Caribbean, and we frankly just sort of celebrate all of that. There is no brand out there right now, I think, any hotter than Royal Caribbean, whether it be the brand new debut of Star of the Seas. Of course, that comes up here in a few weeks. Or if you start thinking about the debut of the Royal Beach Club Nassau in the Bahamas. And for me personally, this may be one of the things for Royal Caribbean I'm more excited about than almost anything else, just simply because I think it's one of the things that's going to allow Royal Caribbean to sort of stand out from anybody else that might try to play in its space. Because let's face it, for those of you who have been on a cruise vacation before, it's almost certainly likely that you have been to Nassau. It's the most commonly visited port. And yet there ends up being this sort of like been there, done that feel because so many people have been to Nassau. But you have never been to Nassau like this. When the Royal Beach Club debuts, it's going to be kind of like right there at the port. You're going to take a short water taxi that's going to kind of interact with some of the local stuff there in Nassau, but also to get you there to the Royal Beach Club, like right there adjacent to the port, short water taxi away. And you're going to get a chance to experience kind of a similar vein to what, say, Perfect Day Coco Cay is, what the brand new Perfect Day Mexico is going to be like when it debuts. This unbelievable kind of beach club experience exclusively for those on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. And by the end of this year, you'll get a chance to experience that firsthand. When we go on our DawgNation cruise next April, Royal Beach Club will be operating, and so many folks I know will be loving to be a part of that. So give Jessica Slater a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. You can tell her, I want to be on Star of the Seas this August. I want to be on Royal Beach Club in Nassau once it opens. I want to be a part of the really fun, new, exciting things happening for Royal Caribbean. She can help you out with all of that. Now, that said, let's get ready to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean, of course, in Nassau. A lot of beautiful golf courses, things like that. In fact, I like, you're in a boat out there in the harbor. You kind of sail around some of the pretty ones, and it's always fun for me to be able to see. And speaking of golf, I briefly mentioned this a little earlier. This is probably the story that's kind of in the college football internet universe that I'm the most interested in today. So Auburn coach Hugh Freeze has been called out for how frequently he's been playing golf. I'm going to give you the backstory on all of this. First of all, it is important to note the context here. As we've been saying, Auburn's been losing recruiting battles. Shadarius Tootle flipped from Auburn to Georgia on Sunday. They lost the wide receiver from Douglas County, Devin Carter, to Florida State later on in the same week. That one, you got to understand, really stung because, reminder now, Gus Malzahn is the Florida State offensive coordinator. So this was the old Auburn coach, the guy they decided they didn't like, getting over on the new Auburn coach, and Auburn fans definitely don't like that. Auburn's what? Some of y'all know the rankings better than I do. Like outside the top 60 right now in recruiting. I'm talking about zero recruiting momentum. So what is Hugh Freeze doing instead of recording? Well, apparently, as one Auburn message board poster has discovered, he's been playing a lot of golf. And I guess this has been confirmed by a report at AL.com. Now, I have very complicated feelings on this because on the one hand, this is just, I guess it's the message board poster that started this, and so many interesting things sort of begin on these message board communities. The message board poster finds this first. AL.com confirms it. It is a good idea for story. You can't deny that. However, I don't love the idea of golf shaming, saying somebody's necessarily playing too much golf, and that is, as someone who does not have a pretty swing, we're watching Freeze playing golf on our video here. That is not exactly the prettiest swing for Freeze. So apparently the frequency with which he's playing golf is not helping things right now. A little bit of a hitch in his giddy up there. But anyway, let me give you the facts on this as reported by AL.com. that Freeze has recorded, and this is through the handicap system. You know, the way in which the handicap system works now is you update your scores, and that kind of gives you a regularly updating handicap score. So Freeze has apparently recorded 10 rounds of golf through the first 20 days in June. He's played golf 10 times in this month alone, according to reporting here from AL.com. And there had been some rumors on the internet, I don't know if this is true, that the Auburn coaching staff took off last weekend, which made a bunch of Auburn fans really mad. This is how deep we get into the weeds down here sometimes. But apparently that's the case. And so, like, the message board poster kind of compared this to, like, other coaches around the SEC. You perhaps will be happy to know that Kirby Smart has recorded 0 scores lately. So apparently Smart kind of post-Regions Pro-Am the other day, at least according to the reporting from AL.com, has not been playing very much golf since then. But Freeze has been playing 10 times. Now, let me tell you why this is complicated for me. I don't think we should golf shame. In other words, I think that golf is sort of upper class coded. And so therefore it's sort of, in the eyes of some, thought of as sort of a rich man's endeavor. And, it's like working people don't play golf because they don't have time to play golf. And there's at least one element of that that's somewhat true in the fact that the participation rates for golf exploded post-pandemic in 2020. So pretty clearly for a while, a lot of people were playing golf instead of working. Pretty clearly that was obviously true. If you've tried to go to your local course during that period of time, you perhaps experienced some of that. But at the same time, I think that golf actually gets a little bit of a bad rap. I mean, I'll tell you this, and I told you I could talk about this forever. We won't do it. Look, I think that hard driving people, and coaches would certainly qualify for this, it's possible to sort of rest your body without resting your mind. Like, you can sit around at the beach and do nothing physically, but your mind never stops racing. And that's not a very relaxing experience to have sort of a monkey mind bouncing around at the same time your body's trying to be still. Doesn't work very well. So here's what I've discovered, and I can say this for men because I am a man. For a lot of men, finding a leisure activity that does occupy your brain, occupy your thoughts, is actually a lot more relaxing. So the fact that Freeze played golf 10 times, that in and of itself, I don't necessarily see that as problematic. Sometimes we do this with presidents. So-and-so played golf 8 million times. Both parties. Sometimes you get, criticism of how frequently someone's played golf. Once again, I'm not a golf shamer. I don't necessarily think a large number of rounds of golf is necessarily some sort of evidence that you've not been working. I think this sticks to Freeze a little bit because of the fact that recruiting rankings are so low. Here's the other thing, too. It's like, coaches for the most part already. And if you notice this, like almost any celebrity social media now is like nothing but promotional stuff. Have you noticed this? Your favorite musician, something like that. There is no more, here's what I'm doing in my personal life. It's mostly, anyway, I'm going to be at so-and-so Red Rocks Amphitheater on July the 19th or whatever else. Like, people have just stopped sharing details about their personal life, which is maybe what we should have all been doing anyway. So if Freeze has aired here, it's probably, I would say, more along the lines of, why are you updating your handicap score? Why are you recording these scores? You'd be better off just sort of keeping this private because you know how judgy people can be. Now, Auburn fans are mad because they're not winning recruiting battles. That I get. And when you're kind of wondering, what's our coach doing? Oh, he's playing golf every day this month. Like, I do get that kind of bumps up against this. But overall, I'm not really a golf shamer, nor do I think anybody else should be. Because after all, the other thing I'll say about this, and I promise we'll move on, I mean, golf is sort of thought of to be an expensive hobby, but it doesn't necessarily have to be, by the way. Like, compared to, like, say, hunting. Sometimes hunting is sort of thought of as more, kind of a blue-collar-based hobby compared to, like, say, golf. But my gosh, how much does, like, a Beretta rifle cost? I mean, that's just as expensive as, like, the nicest set of clubs ever possibly could be. So I don't quite know that golf gets a fair treatment in society anyway. And I'm not going to shame Freeze for playing too much golf. But in and around those lessons. I'm sure if you're an Auburn fan, or I should say, in and around those rounds of golf, you probably wish he'd mix in a recruiting win or two here and there. I can certainly get that. Another story. So you got Lee Corso, his family apparently speaking out, and they are upset that the final broadcast for Corso on game day is not going to be with his alma mater, school that he has close ties to, Florida State, who's playing Alabama week 1. It's going to be with the Texas-Ohio State game. And I do get this. From their perspective, it'd be perfect to have Corso go out doing a Florida State game. The very first live show they ever did way back in 1993 was also a Florida State game. Florida State there at Notre Dame. So there'd be some symmetry to that. I do get all of this. I just really wish they wouldn't do this. I really do. I mean, to me, the final years of Corso as an ESPN personality, I think have been handled pretty well. I think they're giving him a dignified exit. I do. I think that Corso has been a lot of fun. I know it's oftentimes been kind of treated as sort of a sideshow type thing with the headgear and stuff like that. But look, from teenage years into adulthood, that's the story of my lifetime as a college football fan, the way in which game day has narrated this experience. I have a lot of affection for Lee Corso. And I want this final broadcast for him, whether I get a chance to actually see it or not. I guess I probably will get to see some of it. I want it to be a good thing, and I want it to be a happy moment. And I don't think it's fair to ask of ESPN, hey, go to a lesser game because it's more meaningful for Corso. I think they're going to do right by Lee Corso on this final game day. I don't think, though, they should be forced or feel like they even have to explain why they wouldn't want to be at the very biggest game of all. Obviously, that's what Texas and Ohio State are. Like, they don't need to sacrifice the broadcast for the sake of Corso's retirement. That feels like a larger ask than is appropriate. So I'm not mad at them, but I would really hope they don't take this too far in terms of why aren't we at Florida State or as opposed to the Texas-Ohio State game. This is going to be a very big day in celebration of Lee Corso. And from my standpoint, that feels like it should probably be enough. It would at least be my perspective on that. Then finally, there's this. I don't know how much of the NBA draft you saw last night. Oh, boy, this broadcast was a mess, but that's perhaps a different thing for a different day. Just keep in mind right now, ESPN is the major, all the decisions for college football get made by ESPN. And when you see how they run things like their own NBA draft telecast, I think sometimes you wonder: is ESPN as the Pied Piper here for the future of college football? How good of a thing is that if they can't execute an NBA draft broadcast? But perhaps a different topic for a different day. The point is, Atlanta Hawks, by best I can tell, someone who knows very little about the NBA, at least at this stage of my life, executed a pretty good trade last night. Kind of acquired a nice first-round pick for the future, and by moving back in the draft, also able to land Asa Newell, the former Dawgs. So you had the Falcons draft Jalen Walker. Now the Hawks have drafted Asa Newell. And I'll tell you this. Once again, I know you don't really come here for my basketball analysis. I thought that Newell had a good year for Georgia. In fact, I think at times Newell had a better year at Georgia than he was often given credit for. The big upset win against Florida, for instance. By the way, Florida may won the national championship. We don't recognize that. As far as we're concerned, Georgia, we value head-to-head around here, and head-to-head, Georgia's got bragging rights over Florida as far as we're concerned. But the point is, in that win, I thought Newell was huge down the stretch. He was getting everything off the glass. I mean, he was getting every rebound. So I think there's a chance that Newell turns into a really good pro. I was happy to see the Hawks draft him. And honestly, I think Atlanta's putting together a nice – I mean, we're not doing NBA analysis here, but kind of a nice group of young talent here. I think they would probably do right to have a little more experience around Trey, and I guess they bring in Porzingis. But that's as much NBA analysis as we're going to do. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, before we wrap up here today, let me also give a shout-out to our friends at the Finish Long Drink. Love them. Love them this time of year. Looking forward to some time off coming up next week. When I'm thinking about time off and just being away from work and hanging out, just relaxing for a little bit, there is nothing that I think about more in those times than the Finish Long Drink. We talked about golf earlier. I'm not a golf shamer. I told you that. In fact, I'm not going to shame you when you're out on the golf course and you want to enjoy a little Finish Long Drink. For whatever reason, every golf course has golfers just love this finished long drink. You see it all the time. In fact, test me on this. You go to your local course, look there behind the bar or in the self-serve area or whatever else, and see if you don't see those finished long drink cans. I mean, on the beverage carts that come rolling around. Finished long drink is all over the place at these local golf courses. But you know what? For pools, for back patios, for anything else, you can get all of that too. In fact, go to thelongdrink.com, find out where you can get some. If you've been enjoying it in previous summers, it's time to kind of bring it back and make it a part of your summer here right now. So online, thelongdrink.com. That is thelongdrink.com for more on that today. There is a very simple thing that makes me happier than almost anything else. For a long time, we've been doing this show, try to do right by you, the audience, try to do right by our sponsors. And when y'all help us out with that, I mean, I'm telling you right now, it is the most satisfying experience I've probably ever felt, certainly from a professional standpoint. And so I want to give a shout out to our buddy Richard Dees here showing this off. How about some brand new Pella windows for Richard? Of course, Pella, one of our great sponsors. I love, the Pella folks, Cassidy, Brian, all them. Just great people. And Richard Dees showing off some brand new Pella windows here. How much fun is that to be? Here's what we know about Richard. He's got some nice energy efficiency taking place inside of his house. That cold AC is not creeping outside of his windows. He's enjoying that upgrade there. We appreciate Richard on that. We'll give him a golden shoe for that. And for all of you who support our sponsors, we're just really, really thankful that you do that. That is more meaningful to me than anything you'll ever know. That shared sense of loyalty we have together is something I'm very, very proud of. Now, what we're not loyal to is those lousy, stinking Gators. And we're not thinking anything about them other than another beatdown coming their way later on this fall. And how about the countdown here? 1,692 days. That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. That is our Gator Hater Updater. We hope you have a great day. We'll see you this afternoon. Craig Dandridge makes his commitment decision. And then back here tomorrow to close out our week, DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. We will look forward to talking to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews is the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that. So let's get some comments. And you can beat up on Hugh Freeze if you want to, but let's don't shame him for playing golf. Although 10 rounds in 20 days is kind of a lot. It's kind of a lot. But, Freeze is probably playing around. I mean, he's probably – see, here's the thing. It's like if you play at your local club, it's taking you 5.5 hours to get around because it's probably pretty crowded. Some of these places that Freeze plays, they're not exactly, stacking up the tee sheet. I'm sure he's probably getting around in 4 hours or so.
Yeah, I don't have the John Tesh music here, but here you go. So a little round ball talk.
There you go, a little round. Yeah, no, we don't have round ball rock. Yeah, we don't have round ball rock from John Tesh, but maybe a little basketball breakdown. Maybe we need to do this. I like that. I wonder if we paid. I don't really know how this works. But if we paid a keyboardist, and I do know some, if we paid a keyboardist to do the dun 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 dun, like if we did our own rendition of that, is that fair usage? If we actually pay a musician to create the music for us, is that?
I don't think you have to pay as much, but I think you still got to pay.
Oh, do you really? I'll tell you what's funny is, and this is
last time.
Yeah, there you go. I like that. I like that. So for all the years that the NBA did not have, for all the years that NBC did not have the NBA, they sold, do you know this, Cody? You're a TV expert. You probably do. Do you know they sold that song to FS1, and FS1 used Round Ball Rock for its Big East basketball? So you've got Seton Hall traveling to, Providence. You got Providence hosting Seton Hall, and you've got the same music that played when Michael Jordan was battling Magic Johnson in the NBA Finals. It's such an
sacrilege.
It's such an incongruency of prestige.
NBC's also taking their nostalgia. You remember the voiceover guy?
I do know this. This is super creepy. I have to admit this.
Say he will be on the promos this year, and he passed away in 2018. So they asked his family to use AI to bring back the voiceover guy for the NBA on NBC.
I think that's super creepy. I really do. And I'm not against all of this in all ways. Like I'm not. It's one of those things you sort of. One of the most important things I think human beings have is a disgust reflex. And I think sometimes that's kind of all you need. And for whatever reason, certain things, AI related, conjuring back old, whether it be voices or imagery or whatever else, feels kind of okay to me. For whatever reason, this particular thing sort of activates my disgust reflex. And I think the disgust reflex is a really important thing for human evaluation.
How do you feel about like a AI Munson? There's been so much talk about that.
I don't want that. I don't want that. I don't want that. Now, let me give you a counterexample, and this is a very dorky thing, but like at Disneyland, they're making an animatronic version of Walt Disney. For whatever reason, I sort of don't mind that. That seems kind of in keeping with the style that already exists there. They have one for all the presidents. Why not have one for Walt Disney? That doesn't really bother me too much. I don't want AI Munson. I think that seems something about that kind of activates a little bit of a disgust reflex for me where it's like, that just sort of seems not quite appropriate. And eventually we're going to have a lot more of that. And I think maybe eventually there's a way to do it well. I'm not saying it'll never be, but my knee-jerk reaction, once again, this is how humans operate. My knee-jerk reaction is yes to this, no to that, and that would be a thing I'd probably say no to, Cody.
Fair enough. Yeah, there's been a lot, so everybody thinks that it could be great. The thing about Munson, too, is some of the stuff that came out of his mouth, like, computer can't even come up with that, and that's the beauty of AI, right? Is like, it's never going to really take over because there's that human element that I think he always brought to.
No, I think that's exactly right. Let's get some more comments. Let's see what else is going on up here. Chef Jay Bowen says no AI. So I'm not no AI in all circumstances. In fact, one of these days, I think AI may make better movies than already exist. I mean, and like I think you could, like I've been thinking about this. It's like if you like a certain movie and you watch it on the streaming platform, you know how it says, it basically like here are movies that are similar to this movie, and you like look at those movies and they're like, this isn't similar to this at all. Like, I don't know why you're saying, hey, more like this, and it's not similar movies. AI may actually really give us a chance to make movies that are similar to other movies that you like, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. So I'm not fully anti-AI in all ways necessarily. And by the way, I think it's the Google AI platform now. Some of the stuff they can do cinematically is mind-blowing, scary. But it's really mind-blowing. And I'm not fully against that because, frankly, I think the state of the entertainment industry is pretty bad right now. So perhaps AI could make it better. But I don't like recreating voices right now. But I also didn't mind, like, Carrie Fisher at the end of like the recreation of Princess Leia at the end of, like, say, what do you call it? The Star Wars movie where she's at the very end of that. Spoiler alert. I didn't mind that necessarily. So I don't know. Like I said before, there's a little bit of a disgust reflex. This bothers me. This doesn't. Hard to explain one from the other. Rogue One. She's, how like the young Princess Leia face at the end of Rogue One, that's essentially AI. I didn't mind that. Henry Dion says, we'll find out that some movie star is AI generated soon enough. Yeah, Henry, some of the stuff that I've seen AI lately, I mean, it's wild how good it's getting. Wild. And we're also getting to the point where, like, so here's my AI prediction, and then we can move off this if y'all want to. Here's my AI prediction, that eventually people are going to prefer AI photos. They essentially already do, right? I mean, it's like people like touched up photos. They like enhanced photos. When it comes to photo and video, I think that people will prefer that. I do believe, and y'all can save this tape and laugh when we're enslaved by the robots, but I do believe that even years in the future, people will still prefer human words over AI words. I do believe that. Now, there's a certain kind of slop that probably AI can easily replicate. But I'm talking about real, authentic interaction. Like you don't really hear AI telling jokes very well, for instance. There are certain things that humans say that humans will prefer to AI. And like I said, y'all can save this. You can laugh at it when it's no longer true because, this stuff's obviously happening pretty fast. But I think that years in the future, my prediction is people will prefer AI imagery and still prefer human communication. That's my prediction. Let's see what else. George on Tap says, how is Arch Manning's offensive line? It is a big question for Texas if you want to kind of get into questions. It seems like they've got bodies to replace on both the offensive and defensive lines. Now, listen, here's where I kind of part company with some of y'all who, like, I love making fun of Texas and I love, like, Georgia beating them twice and the kind of hype machine that exists around them. But I also owe it to you to try to be as honest as I possibly can be. And as I've said now, going back to kind of the end of the Big 12 era for Texas, it was obviously they were taking very seriously. And this is where I think that Steve Sarkisian has earned some respect from me that maybe I didn't have for him prior to him becoming Texas head coach. He has been building these lines of scrimmage. I mean, they have a ton of talent sort of waiting in the wings, probably on both lines, but it is somewhat inexperienced right now. They do have some folks to replace. So if you want to kind of start wondering, well, where could they perhaps be deficient? I do wonder about the Texas wide receiving corps just a little bit, doing some, replacing along the offensive line. If you want to look for those vulnerabilities, perhaps that's it. Dennis Wilson says it's time for him to get back on the recruiting trail. Yeah, Dennis, I'm sorry. Miami's been so tough on Georgia lately. But you'll be back. Hey, you'll be back. You didn't get Jae Lamar. You might not get Eric Cooper. You might not get James Johnson. But you know what? Listen, you guys will be fine. You guys will be fine. Do you play Tech this year? Because if you do, be careful. Be careful with Georgia Tech if you play them. And of course, Dennis, I'm just giving you a hard time. You're one of my guys, Dennis. I'm glad you're here. Let's see what else. By the way, Anonymous Handle says that AI will never be able to mimic human emotion in art. I think that's probably true, but I don't think it's impossible to imagine a future in which AI generative stuff is considered art. For example, like here's one of the things that I think could be true is I think that certain people are going to become known for being really good at creating prompts. Like to go back to the idea of a movie. Like if I said, hey, give me so-and-so movie crossed with so-and-so movie, but I want it to be a comedy instead. Like certain people are going to become known as really providing creative prompts for AI. And like, say, the movies they produce are going to be, I think, artistic in nature, even though they're created by a computer or whatever we're calling this. I don't think it's impossible to imagine that we may one day see AI that sort of feels like art. But I do agree with you that there's a very good chance that something about it feels different than what human art would be. And I think there could still be a place for human art even in that world. I also think there's at least some chance, and people say this too, that there are some elements of AI that are getting worse. People have chronicled this, there are some basically what used to be sort of a Google search that, kind of now these sort of AI queries, asking a question to AI and you're getting back incorrect information. In some cases, it's just false, citing books that don't exist and things like that. And the theory around some of this is that AI, being kind of a large language model, is pulling in all the language, but AI itself is producing so much language that AI is now grabbing AI to formulate some of the stuff that it's writing, and that's kind of garbled junk in some cases. So the prevalence of AI in the eyes of some is making some of the AI worse. I'm not smart enough to even know. That's just something I've read. Georgian Tap says, I don't like passive aggressive, then I give the business. Is Dennis passive aggressive? Oh. I see what he's saying. He's saying that I criticize coaches such as Bret Bielema for being passive aggressive, and then I'm passive aggressive to Dennis. That's a fair criticism. That's a fair criticism. I don't even have a response to that. That's a fair criticism. Dennis Wilson also comes back at me because Georgia barely escaped against Georgia Tech. That's also a fair criticism. And I also have very little in the way of response back to that. So yes, I'm going to take both of those arrows, and I'm going to move over here to DawgNation.com for a minute. Garrison Tucker says that AI is awful at complex math. I know that for a fact. That's really interesting. Because I've been kind of wondering, some of y'all know this. I like point spreads and things like that. I like the way in which power ratings are tabulated, but I'm not good at math. I don't really know anything beyond basic arithmetic. So in other words, I have a little bit of an idea of how odds are constructed and how power ratings are come together. I have a little bit of an idea about how it happens, but I don't have the mathematical wherewithal to crunch some of those numbers. In other words, I have a sense of what it requires, but I don't quite have the ability to do it. Just being honest, I don't really have much more than just basic arithmetic skills. And so I've kind of wondered, I wonder if I pose the right question the right way, could I get the information back that I'm seeking? Not who's going to win the game, but, just certain statistical things that are sort of beyond my ability to tabulate or even, fully investigate. I have kind of wondered that. It's interesting to hear you as a math guy say that you're not getting good responses back on that. It's also kind of funny, most news organizations, if they publish an AI story, will tell you it's an AI story. They're just pretty bland, Now, what I do find interesting is, and I think that on X, people, I told you before, I don't like people, there's certain phrases I don't like people doing. The other thing that just grates on my nerves now, if you ever follow some of the conversations on X, you'll see this where it's people are constantly asking Grok. Is that what he say? Is it Grok? About whether or not something's true or not. It's just people have turned Grok into a crutch, which I kind of find to be pretty annoying, to be honest. But I do think that Grok has developed a little bit of a tone of voice that's, you can still tell that it's AI, but at least I think you can, but it does have a little more tone of voice, whereas I would say in some AI situations that's kind of missing. Bill Camacho says he's been a numbers freak his whole life. Yeah, Bill, I'm not surprised to hear that. Randy Hall, this is a really good question. So he says, do you kind of envision one day a future where we could see a real version of 2021 Georgia play say 2019 LSU? I feel like that could happen. I really do. And I remember back in the 80s when I was a kid, ESPN tried to do a version of this where it's hey, we're going to put all the best Super Bowl champions in a tournament together. But it was all spliced together video. It was obviously not very real. I also remember there was a time when I was a real little kid, when before the Braves game, they had this sort of 1980s version of a computer simulation of the 69 Braves, which won the division. No, it was the 57 Braves from Milwaukee that had won the World Series against the 82 Braves that had won the division. this is all just fake. It's all just total nonsense. But could there be a real version of that one day? It sort of feels like there could. And if you do this for if you do this for football, then you could do it for boxing, you could do it for anything. And not only could that exist, couldn't you see that being like really popular? I feel like that could be really popular, especially in a day and age in which a lot of athletes are just less interesting than they used to be. I think they've been scared out of being interesting. They're just afraid to be. And so you have these very lackluster personalities in some cases in sports where personality does matter. So for instance, like say boxing, things like that, if you had Muhammad Ali fighting Mike Tyson and it was a legitimate simulation, who's not watching that? I mean, we had people falling all over themselves to watch Mike Tyson against was it Jake Paul? We knew that was fake going into it, and still people were watching it. Like, we already knew it was fake. We already knew we were going to regret watching it, and people still watched it. So if you could ever do an actual simulation where like Ali's fighting Tyson, who's not watching that? But the problem is, and I guess this is where like my human comprehension becomes hard. I mean, to me, it still sort of seems like the old idea of like when I was a kid, people talk about garbage in, garbage out. Like whoever's writing the code's picking the winner, right? I mean, is there ever really a point in which it's a legitimate competition? I mean, doesn't it eventually come down to, whoever's writing the code is picking the winner? Maybe not. Maybe not. Dave Snow says that he's concerned about AI in news media. He says, overseas, I've seen clips on TV that I know are 100% are not true, yet the populace accepts it as a fact. Yeah, so we're going to bump in really, really close to something I don't like to talk about. But I will tell you, Dave, that there have been things recently where, like, I'm pretty internet savvy, to be honest with you. Like, I'm pretty good at sort of knowing what's what on the internet. I just spend a lot of time online, I guess. Most people do, I reckon. But I do think the situation's getting more confusing. And I'm not going to get into any specific details or anything like that. But I do think it's just getting a little tricky sometimes. I do. I think it's getting a little tricky. And I don't know what you do about that. I don't. I did watch, this is not necessarily a recommendation, although I did think it was funny. There's a movie on HBO now called Mountainhead, and it's Steve Carell's in it. It's like a dark comedy, I guess you'd say. And so it's about a bunch of like sort of Silicon Valley billionaires. And one of them creates this like awful AI that's just like destroying the world. And then another guy has created this like software that can determine if something's real or fake. Like maybe we're going to go there one day, like where maybe like we'll eventually have some technology that has some ability to sort of tell what's real and what's fake. But I am with Dave, and Dave's a worldly man. He's lived all over the world, so he knows a little bit about this. I do worry about some of this. Ken Holcomb says wrestling is fake, but some folks still watch it. Here's the thing, and some of y'all know, I've always grown up with an affinity to wrestling. The thing about wrestling is it's not real. It's better than real. And I do think there's a version of AI that could be kind of true about this too, is that the reason why people watch wrestling, as you say, because it's fake, is because how many sporting events have you been to where you paid a bunch of money and the outcome's just not very satisfying, either because your team lost or because just the game wasn't very good? I mean, a lot of times we'll tune in to watch something and the game's just not very good. Like this is more basketball we've talked in 10 years, but like the other night, like Tyrese Halliburton goes down with an Achilles tear, like right at the beginning of Game 7. All the hype for Game 7, it's kind of a flop right from the word go. Well, now you sometimes have injuries in wrestling, but the point is this is where like a scripted storyline is just better. It's always going to be a good main event, and it's always going to build to a good conclusion. And like I said, it's not real, but oftentimes like real sports, not always very satisfying when it's your team not winning or when the game itself is not good. But give me a good script writer, and oftentimes you kind of get better stuff. And also, listen, y'all can laugh at pro wrestling if you want to, but I don't know if you've noticed this. The world at large is a lot more like pro wrestling than it used to be. So Do with that what you will. All right, let me go back to YouTube, and then I'll get on Facebook here. Henry Dion says, Dusty Rhodes, Ric Flair, enough said. Yeah. I mean, the thing of it is like, I talk about wrestling, and so therefore I think it comes across as if, I'm always the most devoted wrestling fan. But as an adult, really what happens is I kind of float in and float out depending on what's going on. And as a kid, Dusty Rhodes, Ric Flair, biggest thing in the world. Obviously, 80s, awesome. Come back to it in the 90s when, the Attitude Era gets going. Kind of in and out a lot since then. I told y'all before, I didn't think this John Cena heel turn has been executed very well, but I'm now more interested in that again. So once again, it's like even in like sort of micro doses, sort of in and out on that depending on what's going on. Anonymous Handle says, could AI become the future of recruiting and playoff seeding? Yeah, I mean, I do think about some of that kind of stuff. Or I also think about, how much coaches will use this just in their thought process. Because, look, one of the things it's very hard for a human brain to comprehend are tendencies. You hear coaches say this a lot, where like during an off week, bye week, they will scout themselves and they are looking for their tendencies. And this is the thing. It's like, this is true if you like baseball. This really shows up. Like the old story was 1988 World Series, which was way before some of y'all were born. But 1988 World Series, Game 1 ends on a walk-off. Kirk Gibson hits home run against Dennis Eckersley. And supposedly, and you can watch the video and you see this, 3-2 count, supposedly Dennis Eckersley, every time that year on a 3-2 count, had thrown a backdoor slider. Supposedly, that's the story. That's the legend. And sure enough, if you watch the video of Gibson prior to prior to the home run that concluded Game 1, he's really leaning over the plate, looking for that pitch, as the legend has it, when it comes. He was hobbled, couldn't really run. This is like this is the moment that defined my childhood in many ways. One of them for sure. So he's leaned over the plate. He's looking for that backdoor slider. If Eckersley had busted him inside, there wasn't a chance in heck Gibson could even make contact. Now, I don't think tendencies now are as obvious as that, but there are, I think, a lot of coaching tendencies. Now, some of y'all say, Mike Bobo's got plenty of them, some of y'all would say. Whether that's true or not, I guess, is in the eye of the beholder. But either way, I do think that AI could potentially help with play sequencing to kind of keep the tendencies from being what they are, because, a smart coach should mix in some running plays and obvious passing downs and some passing plays and obvious running downs. You should have a certain randomness to your play calling, but it's really hard for a human brain to introduce that into the situation. I could see AI doing that, but here's the thing. And this is, I think, one of the interesting things about sports, and it's one of the reasons why I probably like analytics less than I used to, is because there are certain things when it comes to advanced stats that are only true as long as you're the only one using it. For instance, in basketball, everybody kind of knows that it's analytically favorable to take 3-point shots and try for layups. 0-foot shots right there at the rim, and then 3-point shots. The mid-range jumper is thought to be an inefficient shot. That's universally accepted as true. And the first teams that figured that out got a huge advantage. But once other teams are playing the same way, do you realize that the advantage is now negated? That whatever benefit you got from knowing the more efficient shot goes away once other teams are also using the same analytics. It's just back to square one again. It's now just back to zero. So I wonder if it's going to be the same thing with AI, where it's like, hey, we're going to use AI to sort of randomize our play calling to eliminate our tendencies. But there's going to be a counter version of the AI that, perhaps, negates that advantage. And all of a sudden now the human brains are using artificial brains, and we're all just kind of right back to where we started. I do kind of wonder about that. I also think about, I will say this too, and I'm going to get my Facebook comments. Other than like Star Wars, I've never been a big science fiction person. But now that all this crazy stuff is happening in life, I probably am more interested in science fiction than I used to be because I feel like we're living it now. And the warnings of all these science fiction writers of the past seem a lot more relevant to me than they used to. Yeah, so Bill Sanders says the story about Eckersley and the backdoor slider, he says that's not legend. That was from a report from the Dodgers Advanced Scouting Department on Eckersley. So there you go. And there you have it. Boy, talking about a great job here. First of all, how about Major League Baseball back in the stirrups era? When was the last time you saw a player wearing stirrups? That's what that is down around the ankles of Gibson. The high pants with the stirrups. But you can see from the way that he's swinging it, I mean, he is leaned over the plate. Inside fastball, I mean, he just would have stood there and took it for a strike, would have had no choice. So one of the great stories. One of the great stories. And a great job getting the photo on the air there. There's also a really fun thing. You perhaps have seen this. From the Gibson home run, and by the way, it's Vin Scully calling the game on NBC. Like, there's so much good about that. But when the home run clears the outfield wall at Dodger Stadium, there's a car in the parking lot that's leaving, and like right as the home run clears, you can see this, the car puts its brakes on, and even in that area we still had brake lights. So you could see the brake light light up, car slams the brake. Obviously, you would imagine listening to the game on the radio and realizing they had a ticket to one of the most memorable Major League Baseball games of all time, and they left just prior to the memorable moment occurring. Of course, when you consider LA traffic, maybe they didn't make a bad decision, but there you go. Brian Whitaker, thanks for the kind words. Appreciate that. Bill Sanders says, by the way, 65-7 wasn't a good game, but I enjoyed every second of it. Yeah. When it's your team on the right side of that, that's very, very enjoyable for sure. Philip Jordan Wells says Facebook must be AI. That's why BA is avoiding it. I feel like we've done a lot on Facebook this week. Kent Holcomb. So Kent Holcomb, much like me, also enjoys. So what we're doing now is, and honestly, like a lot of shows have done this for a long time. We've only just recently started this, is because we always kind of come on at the same time. So we have sort of a ready-made audience. But a lot of shows will kind of put the thing on at the beginning of a live show to let the audience build a little bit. Kent Holcomb also enjoys the tune. It's, just some licensed music that we purchased. But it does. It's kind of great. I mean, it puts me in a good mood. I feel good. It's awesome. Oh, by the way, Julie C says that Star Trek is better than Star Wars. I have never been a big Star Trek fan. Never been a big Star Trek fan. I just like Star Wars better. I do like space, though. I like things that take place in space. I like the idea of immersing myself in sort of a Star Wars world where you're like spaceships traveling from planet to planet. I do like that. Never been a big Star Trek person. I have my reasons for feeling that way, and I probably won't be sharing much more as to why. But do like Star Wars much better than Star Trek. Billy Cloud also checking out. KC says he likes both Star Wars and Star Trek. I wonder how many people there are that like both of those. Been into the new Star Wars series Andor, because like while I'm a big Star Wars fan, I am not well versed in Star Wars lore. You know what I'm saying? Like I've never read a Star Wars book. I don't know a lot of I don't know a lot of things that would sort of qualify me for fandom. I don't have that. But I have been watching Andor. I don't probably like it as much as other people do, but there are moments that I've really, really thought were very interesting. Spencer Clark says, do you remember Lost in Space? So when I was a little boy, early on Sunday mornings, we'd be getting ready for church, and Lost in Space would come on TV. The Lone Ranger would also come on, and I did like that. And then after that, Lost in Space would come on. I didn't understand that at all. Did not understand that. None of that made any sense to me. I did not understand it. There was that one older guy that was a little bit annoying. The same robot that appeared in a bunch of Twilight Zone episodes had the arms that kind of do like this. Did not understand any of that show. But Sunday mornings while we're getting ready for church, it'd be on after the Lone Ranger went off. And that I did like. Always a big fan of that. R. Edward Moore mentioned Buck Rogers. So there were like a couple of different Buck Rogers, I think. I think we've talked about this before. I loved that. Reruns be coming on. Loved that. Aaron Gray, I guess that would be. Big time stuff. All right, we're going to get ready to go. R. Edward Moore enjoyed Buck Rogers. Yeah, I did too. Randy Hall says, what's my favorite cake? I like yellow cake, birthday, bunch of frosting, just insulin shock. Like I want that. I like cookie cake, but I love like way more than I should, like buttercream frosting, like really, really rich frosting, super sweet. I really like all that stuff. Jonathan Aaron says, did we land on the moon? 100% believe that. 100% believe. Now, I have a very sort of advanced theory on all this, but I do believe that we land on the moon. Absolutely do believe it. I don't know that we could do it again today, but I do believe we did it then. I do believe that. G. Gray says he's never been a big Star Wars fan. See, that's the problem, G, is like, I think that, just being an Alabama fan, I don't know that you appreciate the way the rest of us do what it feels like to watch good conquer evil. I mean, I don't think you have the full appreciation for that. Most of us kind of grow up rooting for the good guys and wanting to see the good guys triumph. And then, when, Luke Skywalker blows up the Death Star, Keely Ringo picks off Bryce Young, there's this feeling of, finally the good guys have won and they've overcome the unimaginable forces of evil. I just don't think that you are as versed in that lore as some of us are, for obvious reasons. Georgia on Tap shouting out Pigs in Space. That's a Muppets reference, correct? Love the Muppets. Love the Muppets. By the way, there's a Spaceballs 2 coming out too. But I do love the Muppets. Anonymous Handle also brings it up. Spaceballs 2 coming out. Randy Hall asking about Wild Wild West. That's another one. I didn't understand that. We actually talked about this the other day. I didn't understand that show. Like when I was a kid, I was very well aware of adult shows, especially the adult shows that ran on like reruns. Because like when I was a kid, like Channel 46, which I guess history comes full circle. All they did was just like run like rerun shows all day long. Best channel there was. It was nothing but like old shows just rerun in syndication. And my grandfather watched all this stuff. As a kid, I watched way too much television. Way too much television. But like when like that show would come on, I didn't understand it. I didn't get that one. George Wrigley says, what about Bigfoot? I'm a no on Bigfoot, but a possible yes on the Loch Ness Monster. That's my feeling on that. No on Bigfoot, but I'll listen to some Loch Ness Monster theories or something along the lines. I think there's stuff in the ocean that we couldn't come close to identifying. Jalen Jackson says, do you think Michael Penix, I should say, is going to be a superstar? Honestly, think he's the most talented quarterback we've had aside from Vic. Yeah, I am interested in Penix. I am. Now, I think one of the things that hurts Atlanta, and gosh knows this has been talked about ad nauseum, is like one of the benefits of having a rookie quarterback is it's helpful to your salary cap. The Falcons are like the only dadgum team in the NFL that could ever have a rookie quarterback. And he's not a rookie anymore, but he's on a rookie contract quarterback. And they're still paying a quarterback $8 gazillion to sort of sit the bench. So like they don't get the full salary cap benefit of this. But I do think that Penix has a chance to be good. And I do think Atlanta's got some offensive weapons. Y'all, there's a chance Falcons improved this year. I think Carolina's going to be better in the NFC South too, but there's a chance Atlanta's just better. One of the things that I do want to see from Penix, and I can't quite tell if they're going to do this or not, I don't necessarily want design runs for him like he's Lamar Jackson, but I do think he's an athlete. He didn't run a ton at Washington, to be honest, but I think he did run at Indiana. Like, go back to Indiana in 2020. Wasn't Penix running at Indiana? Not, Michael Vick necessarily, but wasn't he? I mean, I have memory of him getting yards on the ground. I'd like to see them turn him loose in that regard just a little bit, not to lead the league in quarterback rushing yards necessarily, but I would like to see that unleashed in him just a bit. Tennille asked about Wonder Woman with Linda Carter. I loved that show. For sure. Paul Moon mentioning, no real comparison between, like, say, Penix and Jackson from an athleticism standpoint. Not that kind of guy. I don't necessarily want design runs for him, but I'd love to see, just enough to keep the opposing side honest. I'd love to see some of that. All right, we've got to go. They're also talking about Transformers over here in Facebook, and I love the Transformers too. Big time. I never really liked the Transformers movies that came out, but Transformers like cartoon, Transformers toys, very big deal. Jonathan Aaron says, was I a MASH fan? MASH is too old for me. I am only barely, I remember the last episode of MASH. I was alive when it happened. But MASH all happened, way before me. And like storyline wise, as a kid, that didn't click with me because I didn't get those storylines. None of that made sense. And also, as others have pointed out, it's kind of funny, about the Korean War, but MASH lasted a lot longer than the Korean War did, which is kind of funny. Let us get ready to go. Anything else, DawgNation.com, before we go? UJ Marine on Joseph Jonah Jonye. I know we eventually say this about every player. I do know we do this. I think Jonah Jonye is such an interesting player if he's healthy that I don't know that we're fully processing. That's a pretty good defensive line athlete. That you're going to have to work with there. DT also mentioning Q Johnson. I'll tell you this, a lot of people really like him. I don't know that I know what he's bringing to the table, but there are a lot of people smarter than me that know more about football than I do, and they like him a lot. And that's coming from what takes place behind closed door. Some of that, like, there were a couple of things behind closed doors, I'm led to believe, that Q Johnson did that were, like, really, really impressive. So some of the me not knowing why what he brings to the table, that's because I wasn't present for what he apparently did that generated a lot of buzz. But there are a lot of people who really like him. Eugene Marine says Spaceballs is better than both Star Wars and Star Trek. So there you go. All right. Anything else? Like, seriously, like the last one. Jerry Popham says, it's getting along towards where it should have ended 20 minutes ago. Yeah, probably right. That's probably about right. All right. Foster Moss says that MASH was the last show before TV went to static. There was that. Like, when I was a kid, Channel 8, they played the national anthem. Like they would play the national anthem, and it just went to, like, static, just looked like snow. That was a thing that used to happen. That is true. All right, good stuff. Y'all check out RS Andrews online at rsandrews.com. No snow in the forecast right now, but if you want to feel cool and comfortable on the inside of your house, RS Andrews will help you do that. Find them online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. By the way, this is the song. Don't you love that? I'm telling you right now, this thing is a bop. rsandrews.com for a lot more on that. They'll get you tuned up to Factory Fresh specs. See you this afternoon. If we talk for a few more minutes, it'll just be time for it. Craig Dandridge, 4 p.m. Back tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. We will look forward to talking to you then.